The office was silent except for the sound of rain hammering against the floor-to-ceiling windows 40 stories above Miami. Nicholas Corsetti sat motionless in his leather chair, the kind that cost more than most people made in a year, watching 5 separate screens flicker with surveillance footage. His jaw was a locked hinge. His knuckles were white against the mahogany desk. On screen 1, Allara Reynolds moved through the diner kitchen at 2:48 in the morning, her orthopedic shoes scuffed through at the heel, her waitress uniform hanging loose on a frame that suggested she was rationing her meals. Screen 2 showed her in the back alley, and shaking as she checked over her shoulder, phone pressed to her ear, whispering words he could not hear through the camera's dead audio. Screen 3 caught her entering a parked car on Miami Avenue at 3:15 a.m. Screen 4 showed her handing something to a man whose face remained angled away from the lens. Screen 5 showed her returning to the shelter where her 2 children slept in a borrowed room, her pockets empty. For 3 weeks, he had watched this pattern repeat like a curse that could not be erased. Vinny stood behind him, broad-shouldered and scarred from temple to cheekbone, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Allara's entire monthly rent. His voice came low and measured. She met with someone again last night. Same location. Same time. Handed over another envelope. Nicholas did not turn from the screens. Envelope contents. We could not get close enough to confirm. But Sal intercepted a message on her phone. She was talking to someone about federal databases. Law enforcement databases. The words landed like a blade through the silence. Sal stepped forward, younger than Vinny, his hair slicked back, his expression flat. Boss, we've also got reports she's been asking questions about your operations. Specific questions. About the poker rooms, about supply routes, about which nights the big money comes through. Nicholas's hand clenched. His fingers formed a fist so tight the veins in his forearm rose like dark rivers beneath expensive fabric. He had built an empire on vengeance. He had built it after watching rivals murder his father in front of him when he was barely 17, had watched his father collapse on a warehouse floor with 3 bullets in his chest. He had built his empire so that nobody would ever feel powerless again. So that nobody would ever watch their world shatter and be forced to smile about it. And betrayal, in his world, had only one price. How long has this been happening? His voice sounded like venom, like something poured from a dark bottle. Vinny hesitated. That hesitation meant he would not like the answer. Since the night Micah came home soaked through from the flooded street. Since she pulled him out of the water. Nicholas's entire body went rigid. Screen 3 flickered. There she was again, walking back from somewhere, her shoulders curved inward like a plant trying to fold in on itself. Her face on the camera was hollow, cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, eyes that had learned how not to cry because tears were a luxury she could not afford. She had saved his son. The only reason she is still breathing, Nicholas said quietly, is because of that night. Remember that. But his hand was shaking as he pointed at screen 4. Who is she meeting with? We do not know yet, Sal said. But whoever it is, they are careful. Professional. They know surveillance protocols. Then find them. Nicholas's voice was flat, absolute, like a door being sealed shut. Find out what she is selling. Find out who she is selling it to. And when you have answers, bring them to me before the sun rises. The 2 lieutenants moved without another word. Their footsteps echoed across the marble floor, then disappeared down the hallway. The sound of the elevator door closing came as a soft metallic whisper. Nicholas was alone with the screens. He leaned forward and stared at her face, that exhausted face captured in grainy pixels at 2:53 in the morning. He had seen her serve coffee to his men for 3 weeks. He had watched her move through the poker room with her tray, her eyes downcast, her presence so careful and small it was like watching a ghost, quiet and faithful and invisible. She had pulled his son from the flooded street when the storm came. Micah was 9 years old, fierce and small and she had not hesitated. The surveillance footage showed her running barefoot into water that was rising, that was black and furious, and she had grabbed his son and pulled him back to the curb and held him while he coughed up filthy water. And then she had accepted the job in the poker room because Preston Mercer, the landlord who had burned her world to ash, was demanding $150,000 in back rent or her children would be thrown into the street in 10 days. Nicholas did not know that yet. He stared at her face on the screen and something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest, and he did not understand it, and that terrified him in a way nothing had terrified him since his father fell. The rain continued its assault against the glass, relentless, like 1,000 accusations. Behind him, the city lights of Miami stretched out in the darkness, indifferent and gleaming. Nicholas closed his eyes. And in that moment, none of the surveillance footage could capture the one truth that mattered: he was wrong. Completely, absolutely, catastrophically wrong about everything. But what he did not know was that in a few hours, when his lieutenants brought him the evidence they had gathered, when he finally saw what Allara Reynolds had actually been doing with those envelopes and those whispered phone calls, his entire understanding of betrayal would shatter like glass. He would learn that some people bleed to save others. He would learn that the woman he had sentenced to death in his mind was, in fact, the only person who had ever truly understood what it meant to have nothing left to lose. The rain drummed harder against the windows. And in the basement of the Miami Police Department, 3 blocks away, Federal Agent Sarah Chen was reading through Allara's evidence, her hands shaking, her eyes wide, understanding that the case she had been working on for 18 months was about to explode into something that would reshape the entire landscape of organized crime in South Florida. But that story had not begun in Nicholas Corsetti's penthouse office. It had begun 6 weeks earlier, on a summer night when a storm broke open the sky. Let us go back to that night. Let us go back to the beginning, to a moment when Allara Reynolds was counting $34 in tips in a diner kitchen, not knowing that her entire life was about to change. The clock read 3:22 in the morning. The sound of the diner's ancient refrigerator humming in the background, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry insects, and somewhere far away, the first rumble of thunder beginning to speak its threats across the city. The clock read 3:22 in the morning. The sound of the diner's ancient refrigerator humming in the background, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry insects overhead, and somewhere far away, the first rumble of thunder beginning to speak its threats across the city. Allara Reynolds stood alone in the kitchen, her orthopedic shoes worn through at the heel, her apron stained with the evidence of 8 hours of other people's meals. She counted the bills and coins spread across the counter with the precision of someone who had learned to make mathematics mean the difference between survival and collapse. $34. This was everything. Not everything for the night. Everything. This was the sum total of what 6 tables had left her after ordering coffee and pie they could barely afford themselves. She folded the bills once, twice, 3 times until they were small enough to fit in her jeans pocket. The coin she left on the counter for a moment, staring at them like they were puzzle pieces that might suddenly arrange themselves into something more. The shelter was 20 minutes away if the bus was running, 40 if she walked. Either way, the money had to stretch across the next 8 days because rent came due again on Thursday, and this time it would be $5 more. The shelter owner had raised it without warning. Just a note on the bulletin board: utility costs increased. As if the residents had a choice. As if they could negotiate. Allara pulled off her apron and folded it with the same care she gave to the money. She had learned that small rituals, small acts of order, were how people kept themselves from breaking into pieces. She placed the apron in her work bag next to her phone, a device so old that it barely held a charge, that made sounds like it was slowly drowning every time she tried to use it. Outside, the night had split open. Rain fell in sheets so thick she could barely see the next street lamp. The wind came in gusts that seemed to have weight, that seemed to be trying to push her backward, to convince her that forward was impossible. Allara did not have an umbrella. She had owned one once, a blue one with white ducks on it that Emma had loved, but it had burned along with everything else. 6 months ago. 6 months since the fire that had taken the apartment on 5th Street, the furniture she had been paying for in installments, the boxes of photographs that documented her children's lives before everything became temporary. She walked. The Miami streets at night had their own language, their own rhythm. The splash of her shoes in puddles, the hiss of tires from the few cars brave enough to be out in this weather, the distant sound of a siren somewhere in the direction of the beach. She pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. It had belonged to her mother once. That was 7 years ago. The fabric was starting to fray at the seams, and she had sewn it by hand 3 times, each time using thread that was slightly different in color because she bought whatever was cheapest at the dollar store. The shelter loomed ahead, a 3-story building that had once been a hotel in better decades. Now it housed 47 people in 20 rooms. 47 stories of collapse and misfortune and the specific kind of hunger that came not just from lacking food but from lacking hope. She climbed the stairs, her knees aching, they always ached now, from standing in the diner all day, from walking to and from work, from the tension of never quite knowing if she was doing enough. The hallway was dark. She moved through it with a kind of silent caution that had become automatic, that had become the posture of someone learning to take up less space in the world. Room 204. Her children shared a twin bed. She shared a cot that folded against the wall during the day. They were sleeping. Emma lay with her arm draped across her brother's chest, and Daniel had his thumb in his mouth, something he had stopped doing years ago but had started again after the fire, after the loud sound of water and smoke and sirens. Allara sat on the edge of the cot and allowed herself exactly 90 seconds to cry silently, her shoulders shaking, her hand over her mouth so as not to wake them. Then she stopped. She pulled a small box from under the cot, hidden behind the suitcase that contained everything they owned that mattered. Inside was a pair of baby shoes, soft pink leather with white lace trim, sized for feet that no longer existed. Emma's first shoes. She had worn them on the day they brought her home from the hospital, on the day Allara had looked at this tiny human with her impossible eyes and made a silent vow that she would protect her from everything hard in the world. Allara held the shoes in her hands. The leather was cracked now, the lace yellowed, but they were perfect. They were the only thing she had saved from the fire. She had grabbed them on instinct as she carried the children out of the building, had cradled them against her chest as everything behind her dissolved into flame and ash. She kissed them. Just once. Just the smallest pressure of her lips against the worn leather. Then she placed them back in the box and returned the box to its hiding place. The shoes had become something else now. They had become proof that she had once been a different woman. A woman in an apartment. A woman who bought her children shoes. 3 days later, the sky was clear and vicious with heat. The diner smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee, the smell that never fully left the walls no matter how many times they scrubbed them. Allara was mopping the floor near the back in trance when the door opened and a shadow fell across the wet tiles. She knew the shadow before she looked up. She had learned to recognize the weight of it in the air. Preston Mercer stood in the doorway. He was 53, which meant his expensive watch cost more than she made in a month, which meant his suit, charcoal grey, pristine, represented a year of her salary. He smiled, but it was the smile of someone unconcerned with how it appeared to others. It was a smile that had nothing to do with warmth. "Allara," he said. Not a question. A name spoken like a debt being called. She set down the mop. "Mr. Mercer. We need to talk about the apartment." He stepped closer. The back alley door was still open behind him. The sound of the street beyond. Traffic. Horns. The indifferent noise of the city not caring what was about to happen. The one that burned down. The one on 5th Street. "I don't own it anymore." "No," he said. "You don't. But you owed me the rent. 8 months of it. Do you know how much that is?" She did not answer. $150,000, he said. His voice was level, conversational, the tone you might use to discuss the weather. "Your name was on the lease. That means the debt stays with you. Insurance doesn't pay for acts of God, Allara. Which means you pay. You understand." She understood. She understood the mathematics of her own powerlessness. She understood that her name on a legal document had turned her into someone responsible for something she had not chosen, something she could not undo. "I can try to." "You have 10 days, he said. He moved closer, and she could smell his cologne, expensive and aggressive, something that seemed designed to announce his presence like a weapon. His hand touched her arm. Not violent. Just heavy. Just a reminder that weight existed. 10 days to find $150,000, or I can arrange other payment methods. Do you understand what I mean by that? She jerked away from him. I'll find the money, she whispered, though the words felt like lies even as they left her mouth. I'm sure you will, he said. He turned and walked back out into the heat. The door closed. The mop remained on the floor, the bucket of grey water reflecting the fluorescent lights overhead like a mirror into something small and drowning. That night, Allara sat in the shelter bathroom with the baby shoes in her hands. The bathroom had no lock on the door, so she had wedged a chair under the handle, a pointless gesture that at least made her feel like she had claimed this small space as her own. The shoe seemed smaller somehow. Time did that to memory. It compressed things. It made you question whether they had ever been real at all. She pressed them against her chest. The leather was so soft. That was what she remembered about buying them. How soft they were. How Emma's feet had been so tiny that the shoes had seemed enormous. Now those same feet could run and jump and kick a soccer ball that the shelter provided for children, a ball that was held together with duct tape and hope. Now those same feet would walk through a world that Allara could not protect her from. A world where mothers lost apartments and landlords called in debts and rain fell on people with nowhere to go. But that night, as Allara sat in the bathroom holding the only sacred thing she owned, she did not yet know what was coming. She did not yet know that in 3 weeks, on a summer night when the sky would split open with rain, her entire understanding of what was possible would change. She did not yet know about the boy in the flooded street, or the man who would emerge from a black SUV, or the choice she would make when faced with a child drowning in front of her and the knowledge that saving him might save her. She only knew that she was tired. That her hands ached. That her children were sleeping in the next room, and she had promised them things she could not deliver. She only knew that tomorrow she would return to the diner, and she would smile at strangers, and she would count whatever they left her, and she would lie down on her cot and listen to the sounds of the shelter at night, the breathing of other broken people, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of sirens speaking their endless story. She held the shoes and waited for morning. The plasma donation center smelled like antiseptic and old pennies. Allara lay on the gurney at 2:17 in the morning, her left arm extended, a needle sliding into the vein that ran along her inner elbow like a map of necessity. The nurse, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Patricia, had stopped asking questions 3 donations ago. Now she simply checked the iron levels, frowned at the numbers, and proceeded anyway. Blood flowed from Allara's body into the clear tubing, dark red becoming pale yellow as the machine separated plasma from everything else. $60. That was the price of her own blood. $60 that would chip at the $150,000 Preston Mercer had decided she owed him, though the interest climbed like a vine choking the life from a garden. Your levels are dangerous, Patricia said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had said this too many times to too many desperate people. This is your 3rd time this week. Allara did not open her eyes. I need the money. The needle stayed in. The machine kept humming. Outside, Miami's summer heat pressed against the building like a living thing, even at this hour, even in the darkness before dawn. Allara had learned that the city did not sleep. It only pretended to rest while people like her kept moving, kept working, kept bleeding themselves dry in medical facilities that asked no questions because asking questions meant acknowledging the scale of human suffering, and acknowledgement required action. 20 minutes later, she sat up slowly, pressing gauze against the puncture wound. Patricia handed her the cash in worn bills. Allara folded it into her pocket without counting. She already knew what it was. She had learned to calculate her entire worth in increments of $10 and $20. The drive to the office building took 12 minutes. Allara pulled into the underground parking garage at 4:58 in the morning, exactly 4 minutes before her shift began. The building was a 40-story tower of glass and steel, home to law firms and accounting firms and insurance companies. By day it gleamed with the polish of legitimate business. By night it became her kingdom, the only place where she could work without pretense, without the burden of serving other people's needs while her own remained invisible. She pushed her cleaning cart past the security desk, where the night guard barely glanced at her. She was neither memorable nor threatening. She was simply part of the landscape, like the potted plants in the lobby that no one watered or the abstract paintings on the walls that no one looked at. Invisibility was a kind of freedom, she had learned. It meant people did not watch you. It meant you could move through spaces without being touched. The offices on the 31st floor belonged to Mercer Properties. Allara had found that particular office 3 weeks ago while cleaning the 32nd floor. She had not gone inside initially. But then came the night when Patricia warned her about her iron levels, when the plasma center seemed to pulse with her own desperation, and she understood that $60 was not enough, and $120 was not enough, and there was no amount that would ever be enough at this rate. Preston would bleed her until there was nothing left, and then he would take her apartment, take her children, take the last sacred thing she owned, which was the memory that she had once been someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone who mattered. So she had picked the lock on Mercer Properties at 4:32 in the morning on a Tuesday, her heart hammering against her ribs like something trying to escape a cage. The office was smaller than she expected. A single large desk. Filing cabinets. A computer that she could not access without the password. But there was a shelf, and on that shelf sat folders with names written on the tabs. Names she recognized. Names that appeared in the poker room where she served drinks and watched men push millions of dollars across felt tables, watched Nicholas Corsetti's men collect payments that came from sources Preston never discussed in official paperwork. Allara had photographed 17 documents with her phone that first night. She had done it carefully, each page placed flat under the overhead light, each image sharp enough to be readable. She had replaced everything exactly as it was. Her hands had shaken so violently she nearly dropped the phone 3 times. The next morning, she had driven to a legal aid office on the corner of 5th and Flagler. The lawyer's name was Dr. Reeves. He was a thin black man in his 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting a system designed to exhaust him. She had sat across from his desk, hands folded in her lap, and placed a USB drive in front of him. "What is this?" he had asked. "Evidence," she had said. "Preston Mercer is running money through his real estate holdings. He's connected to organized crime. And he's threatening me to cover up the fact that he's committing fraud on a massive scale." Dr. Reeves had removed his glasses and studied her for a very long moment. Then he had inserted the USB drive into his computer. As he scrolled through the images, his expression had shifted from skepticism to something sharper. Recognition. Anger. The look of a man who had spent his life waiting for the moment when the system's ugliness became undeniable, when the evidence was so clear that even the most corrupted judges could not look away. "How did you get these?" he had asked. "I cleaned the office," she had said. "I found the files." "This is trespassing and theft of private documents," he had said slowly. "In court, it could be dismissed as inadmissible. Obtained illegally." Allara's heart had sunk. "So it's useless?" "No," Dr. Reeves had said. "It's a roadmap. With this, I know exactly what public documents to request. Property transfers, financial disclosures, bank records that are matters of public record. I can build a case that doesn't rely on your photographs. It just takes longer." He had looked at her directly. "How much longer do you have?" She had thought of the $150,000. The interest climbing daily. The 10 days Preston had given her before eviction. "Not long." "Then we need more," he had said. "If you can access his computer, get account numbers, transaction histories, anything that connects him directly to the organized crime network operating through Miami, that would accelerate everything." That was when the meetings in parked cars had begun. Tuesday nights, after her shift at the poker room. A grey sedan parked 2 blocks away from the diner. Allara would walk to it quickly, heart hammering, and sit in the passenger seat while Dr. Reeves reviewed photographs, took notes, and explained how the evidence he was gathering would eventually find its way to federal prosecutors. She had filled 3 USB drives with images of Preston's computer screens, captured when she snuck into the Mercer Properties office after midnight and photographed whatever she could reach before the security guard's rotation brought him back around. What she did not know was that Vinny had been following her. What she did not know was that Nicholas Corsetti's security team had flagged her departures from the poker room, noted the pattern, and reached their own conclusions about what a desperate woman in a borrowed car must be doing at 2 in the morning. What she did not know was that the man she was working for, the man whose son she had saved from floodwaters, the man whose voice carried the weight of empires, had already decided her fate. The parking garage was empty except for her car and the silence that pooled in the concrete spaces like stagnant water. Allara walked toward her vehicle, her muscles aching from standing for 8 hours at the diner, followed by 2 hours cleaning offices that other people had destroyed without thinking. Her feet had stopped burning 3 weeks ago. Now they felt simply absent, like her body was a vehicle she inhabited but no longer truly occupied. A black SUV pulled smoothly into the space beside her, cutting off her path forward. The rear door opened. Vinny sat in the back seat, his hand resting on the door frame with the casual posture of someone who understood that he did not need to point a gun to make a threat. Behind him, Allara could see another man, Sal, she thought, though Nicholas Corsetti's lieutenants all wore the same expression of lethal patience. "Get in," Vinny said. Alara's throat went dry. "I need to get home. My children." "Get in," he repeated, and the gentleness in his voice made it worse than any shout could have been. "Mr. Corsetti wants to see you." She got in. The drive took 30 minutes. They did not speak. The radio played Italian music, something classical and mournful, violins that seemed to describe the entire architecture of grief. Allara sat with her hands pressed together, her mind fragmenting into 1,000 catastrophes. They knew. Somehow they had discovered what she was doing, and Nicholas Corsetti did not forgive betrayal. Everyone in Miami knew that. She had heard the stories in whispers at the diner, watched customers lower their voices when the Corsetti name appeared in the news, seen the way people looked over their shoulders when discussing what happened to people who made mistakes in his world. But she had not stolen from him. She had not betrayed him. She had been gathering evidence against Preston Mercer, against the man who was destroying her. The distinction seemed small now, sitting in the back of the SUV with Vinny's eyes on her like an animal being studied before the slaughter. The restaurant was called Nostalgico, located on a quiet street in the Brickell neighborhood where the buildings were old money and the security was invisible because the men holding the weapons did not look like guards. They looked like businessmen. Allara was escorted through a side entrance to a private dining room where the walls were lined with dark wood and the lighting came from candles that had probably been burning for a decade, their scent so layered it had become a color rather than a smell. Nicholas Corsetti sat in a booth with his back to the wall, as men in his position always did. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Allara's annual rent, charcoal gray, tailored so precisely it seemed almost surgical. His shirt was white, open at the collar, revealing the upper curve of his chest and a thin gold chain that caught the candlelight. His hair was dark, beginning to silver at the temples in a way that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than less. The scar ran along his jawline like a thin line of truth in a face built on careful deception. But it was Micah who registered first. The boy sat beside his father, kicking his feet beneath the table, eating pasta from a white plate. When he saw Allara, his entire face transformed into light. "That's her, Papa. The lady from the rain." Micah jumped up and ran to her, throwing his arms around her waist with the fierce certainty of childhood. "You saved me. Papa said you saved me from the water." Allara's hands moved automatically to touch his hair, stroke his back. Over his small shoulder, she met Nicholas's eyes. "Sit," he said. It was not a request. She sat across from him, Micah between them, the boy suddenly shy now that she was this close, awareness that something serious was happening reaching even his 9-year-old perception. Nicholas set down his wine glass with a deliberation that made the gesture feel significant. "You pulled my son from the street that night," he said. His voice was exactly as she had imagined it would be, deep and solid like an oath, each word weighted with consequence. During the storm. You put his life before your own safety. Allara nodded, not trusting her voice. Why? The question came as a blade wrapped in ice. Because he was drowning, she said. I could not let him die. Something in Nicholas's expression shifted. For a moment, the calculation that normally lived behind his eyes receded, and she saw something else, something almost like grief, almost like recognition. But then it was gone, replaced by the careful architecture of a man who had learned long ago that showing his interior was the fastest way to lose everything. Name your price, he said. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. In that moment, Allara understood the gulf that separated her world from his. In her world, people did not ask what payment was owed. They took what they wanted and left you counting the cost. But Nicholas Corsetti, who built empires on vengeance, was offering her something precious, a choice. I don't want anything, she said. I'm glad he's safe. Micah was watching both of them now, sensing that something pivotal was occurring in the space between his father and this woman who had pulled him from drowning. Nicholas leaned back in his seat, studying her face the way a jeweler studies a stone, looking for flaws that might indicate its true value. Everyone wants something, he said finally. Before Allara could respond, Vinny leaned in and whispered something to Nicholas that she could not hear. His jaw tightened. A muscle worked beneath his scarred skin. Mercer, he said, the name emerging like a curse word. Preston Mercer owns property with you. With men who work for me, Vinny confirmed. Underground operations. The poker room where, he stopped, realizing. Understanding bloomed across Nicholas's face like a bruise. She had not chosen to work at the poker room. She had been placed there. Connected to him through the man who was destroying her life. The coincidence was too clean. The providence too perfect. In the Corsetti world, there were no coincidences. I need to go home, Allara said. My children are alone. My men will see you to your car, Nicholas said. Not a question. Not a negotiation. But as she stood to leave, Micah caught her hand. Come back, he asked. Papa says you saved my life. That means you're important. Will you come back? The question broke something in her, and she realized it was that exact moment when Nicholas Corsetti decided that Allara Reynolds was not the threat he had been searching for. It was not her words or the evidence she had gathered. It was the way she knelt down to look into a child's eyes and said, yes. I will come back. Because a woman who would kneel for a stranger's child was not the kind of woman who betrayed for money. 2 days later, Vinny found her at the diner. Vinny found her at the diner 3 days after Catherine Mercer's broadcast went viral. He walked through the front door at 2:24 in the morning, when the graveyard shift was at its quietest, just Allara and one drunk man nursing cold coffee at the counter. The bell above the door chimed. She looked up from wiping down the espresso machine, and her whole body went rigid. Mr. Vinny, she said, her voice trembling like a candle in the wind. I haven't missed a shift. I've been working, I promise. I'm not here about that, Vinny said. He was a broad man, thick-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair and a scar that ran from his temple to his jawline like a crack in marble. He wore a charcoal coat that cost more than 3 months of her rent. We need to talk. Outside. The drunk man didn't look up. Allara untied her apron with shaking hands, stepped into the humid Miami night. The asphalt still steamed from an earlier rain, and the smell of wet concrete and diesel fuel hung thick in the air. Nicholas knows, Vinny said. The words dropped like stones into still water. About everything. Preston, Catherine, the recordings you made. He knows you weren't stealing from him. Allara's breath caught. He's going to. Kill you? Vinny shook his head. No. He's going to help you. She stared at him, unable to process the words. Help her. In the Corsetti world, help did not exist as a concept. There was only transaction, leverage, survival. Why would he do that? The question came out barely audible. Because, Vinny said, he has a son who was drowning in a flooded street, and you pulled him out without knowing who he was, without asking for anything in return. And because a woman who would do that is not the kind of woman who deserves to die. Allara's knees felt weak. My children are safe. They will remain safe. Vinny reached into his coat and pulled out a phone. Not her phone. A new one. Nicholas needs you to do one more thing. Tonight. After that, everything changes. She took the phone with numb fingers. What does he need me to do? Call Preston Mercer. Tell him you found a way to pay the $150,000. Tell him you'll meet him tonight at the warehouse on Miami Avenue at midnight. The old one, near the docks. Tell him you're bringing the money. The warehouse. The place where men disappeared. Where deals were sealed in darkness and concrete. He'll know it's a trap, Allara whispered. Yes, Vinny said. He will. But he'll come anyway. Because men like Preston Mercer believe they are untouchable. They believe that money buys immunity from consequence. They are about to learn they are wrong. Vinny turned and walked back toward his black SUV, idling at the curb with its engine purring like a predator. Make the call now, he said over his shoulder. Nicholas is listening. Allara's hands shook as she dialed Preston's number. It rang 3 times before he answered, his voice slurred with sleep and whiskey. Who the hell is this? It's Allara, she said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. I have the money. Silence on the other end. Then, you're lying. Midnight, she continued. The warehouse on Miami Avenue. The old distribution center. You come alone, you bring the papers, I bring the money. We both walk away. And if I don't believe you? She closed her eyes. Then you never get paid, and I take everything I know about your operation to the FBI. I have recordings, Mr. Mercer. I have documents. I have months of evidence. The pause that followed lasted 6 seconds. She counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Midnight, Preston said finally. Come alone. No police. No tricks. The line went dead. Allara lowered the phone. Vinny was already gone, but she could still smell the leather of his coat on the air, could still hear the echo of his footsteps on the wet pavement. She walked back into the diner on legs that felt like they might collapse, and she clocked out without speaking to anyone. The next 6 hours were the longest of her life. She drove to the shelter and sat in the car outside the building, watching the window where Emma and Daniel slept on narrow cots in the darkness. Her children. Her entire reason for breathing. She had not told them goodbye. She had not told them that she loved them one more time. If something went wrong at that warehouse, if Preston had decided to betray Vinny's trap, if anything went sideways in the dark. Her new phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, you will not be alone. Trust. At 11:51 p.m., Allara drove toward the warehouse. The old distribution center sat on the edge of the port, surrounded by chain-link fencing and darkness so complete it seemed solid. Stray cats scattered as her headlights swept across the gravel lot. The smell of salt water and rust and something older, something like decay, filled the air. Preston's Mercedes was already there, parked near the building's entrance. She could see his silhouette behind the windshield, smoking a cigarette. She parked 30 feet away and sat in the darkness, her heart hammering against her ribs. The warehouse door opened. Preston stepped out, backlit by interior lights. He was a thin man in his 50s, with the kind of face that came from a lifetime of believing he deserved everything. His suit was silk. His watch was gold. His smile was a blade wrapped in cruelty. Well, he said as she stepped out of her car. Allara Reynolds. The miracle worker. Where is this money you've suddenly found? I have it, she said. Her voice did not shake. 50,000 in the car. Another 100,000 waiting for you in an account. You get the 50 now, you get the codes to the account, you let me go. Preston laughed. It was the laugh of a man who had never experienced consequences. You think I'm stupid? You think I would believe? The world turned white. Headlights. Everywhere. 6 black SUVs pulling in from all directions, their vehicles sliding across the gravel lot with precision born from countless operations. Men in FBI raid jackets poured out, weapons drawn but not hostile, their movements synchronized like dancers in a rehearsed piece. Preston stumbled backward, his face draining of color. No. No, no, no. Preston Mercer, one of the agents, called out, her voice cutting through the humid night. Federal Bureau of Investigation. You're under arrest. He ran. He actually ran, his silk suit flashing in the headlights as he bolted toward the warehouse. The agents moved like ghosts, cutting off every exit. Within 20 seconds, he was on the ground, his wrists zip-tied, his screams tearing through the darkness. Money laundering. Extortion. Blackmail. Conspiracy. Trafficking in human labor, the lead agent read from a tablet, her voice steady as concrete. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Preston thrashed like a wounded animal, his face contorted with rage and terror. You can't do this. I have connections. I have? You have 40 years of federal prison, the agent said. That's what you have. Allara stood beside her empty car, watching the man who had threatened her children being hauled into a transport vehicle. She did not move. She did not speak. She just stood there, witnessing the moment when the world corrected itself, when the scales that had been broken for so long began, finally, to balance. A figure emerged from the darkness beside her. Nicholas Corsetti. 6'2", broad-shouldered, wearing a black cashmere coat that cost more than everything Allara had owned before the fire. His dark eyes were fixed on Preston's face as the car pulled away, carrying him toward a federal detention center and the first day of a 40-year sentence. It's done, Nicholas said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. Preston Mercer will never touch you or your children again. Allara turned to look at him. The scarring that ran from his eye to his cheekbone seemed deeper in the harsh light of the floodlamps, a map of violence and survival written across his face. And yet, standing there in the humid night with the sound of police radios crackling in the distance, he did not look like a man made of violence. He looked like a man made of something else entirely. Catherine, Allara said. It was not a question. It was the name of the other blade still hanging over her head. Tomorrow, Nicholas said. Federal agents are executing her arrest warrant at dawn. Her penthouse, her bank accounts, her social standing. Everything she built on cruelty is about to collapse. How? Allara whispered. Because, Nicholas said, turning to face her fully, you gave us the evidence. And I gave them the leverage. And sometimes, in this city, that combination is enough to bring down empires. Allara felt something crack open inside her chest, felt something that had been frozen for months begin to thaw. Thank you, she said. The words were inadequate. They were everything. Nicholas reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so tender it seemed impossible coming from a man who had built his fortune on vengeance. Go home to your children, he said. And do not thank me yet. This is only the beginning. The hospital room was so quiet you could hear the monitors breathing for her. Allara lay motionless beneath white sheets that seemed to swallow her whole, bandages wrapped around her shoulder, her ribs, her left leg. 3 days of unconsciousness. 3 days of Nicholas Corsetti sitting in the same leather chair beside her bed, his white shirt still stained with her blood, dark stubble shadowing his jaw like a map of sleepless nights. His eyes opened when hers did. He had been sleeping, his head tilted back against the chair, but the moment she stirred, something ancient and protective flickered awake in him. You're here, Allara whispered, her voice like tissue paper, barely holding together. Nicholas leaned forward, his movements careful, deliberate. I have not left. She tried to sit up. Pain shot through her side like a blade, and she gasped. Nicholas was there immediately, his large hand finding the small of her back, supporting her without pressure, without demand. The tenderness of it broke something in her. "Your mother," Allara said, each word a labor. "Is she safe? Because of you?" Nicholas's jaw tightened. He sat on the edge of the mattress, never breaking eye contact. "You took 3 bullets meant for her, Allara." 3. The memory surfaced slowly, like something drowning. The garden. Elena's face frozen in shock. The black sedan. The spray of automatic gunfire. And then, nothing. Darkness. A void where time should have been. "I didn't think," Allara said. "I just moved." "I know." Nicholas reached out and gently took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused, a hand that had held guns and made decisions that ended lives. Now it trembled. "Why?" "You owe me nothing. You owe Elena nothing. You could have let her die and walked away free." Allara looked at their joined hands. "Because she's someone's mother. And I know what it's like to be afraid of losing what you love most." Her eyes found his. "I know that fear. I've lived inside it for years." Something broke behind Nicholas's eyes. A crack in the fortress. Tears slipped down his scarred face, the first he had cried since his father's murder 30 years ago, since the day vengeance became his religion and violence his prayer. "I built everything on hatred," Nicholas said, his voice fractured like old ice. "I thought that's all I was. That's all I could be. And then he stopped." His hand tightened around hers, not painfully, but like he was afraid she might dissolve. "You showed me I was wrong." Over the next 6 months, something shifted in the architecture of their lives. Nicholas paid for Allara's medical care, every specialist, every surgery, every night spent in recovery. He bought her a house, not a mansion, but a real home with a garden and a kitchen with sunlight streaming through the windows at 7 in the morning. He set up trust funds for Emma and Daniel, enough to carry them through college and beyond, but he never mentioned it. The money simply appeared in her account like grace. He did not demand anything in return. He simply protected, provided, and waited. Allara fought her way back to living. Physical therapy sessions where she learned to walk without limping, to breathe without wincing. She enrolled in nursing school, working toward the career she had abandoned years ago when poverty had other plans. She found legitimate work at a clinic in Little Havana, helping people who could not afford hospitals, people who reminded her of the woman she had been 6 months before. She did not need Nicholas's money anymore. But she wanted his presence. One evening, she appeared at his estate unannounced, Emma and Daniel holding her hands on either side. The children were dressed in their best clothes, nervous energy radiating from them like heat. They wanted to meet Micah properly, Allara said. Not as a rescue. As friends. Nicholas stood in the entrance hall, looking at the 3 of them, and something shifted in his chest. A door opening that had been sealed shut for decades. The children played in the garden while Nicholas and Allara watched from the stone terrace. Micah showed Emma his collection of colored pencils. Daniel was teaching the younger boy a soccer move. The sound of their laughter drifted across the lawn like something sacred. I do not know how to do this, Nicholas said quietly. The normal thing. The gentle thing. The way a father should be. Allara took his hand. Then we will learn together. Nicholas pulled her close, and for the first time in his life, he felt the weight of vengeance lift. It did not disappear entirely, that kind of wound runs too deep. But it stopped consuming him. It stopped being the only thing he knew. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, Allara whispered against his chest, her voice steady now, strong. Only love can do that. Nicholas kissed her forehead. Then let us choose love. 6 months later, the garden of his estate became a studio. Nicholas stood with a paintbrush in his hand, showing Emma how to mix watercolors, how to let the pigment flow across wet paper like a prayer. She had chosen blue for the sky, and he was showing her that blue could be endless, could be a million different shades depending on where you looked. Elena watched from the porch, her hand over her heart. "He has not painted since your father died," she had told Allara once. "I thought that part of him was gone forever." At the nursing school graduation ceremony, Nicholas sat in the audience between Elena and Micah. When Allara's name was called, he stood to applaud before she even crossed the stage, his hands coming together with a force that made heads turn. She wore the same blue dress she had sewn herself, her hair pinned up, her face radiant with an accomplishment that belonged entirely to her. Daniel and Micah played soccer in the garden on Saturday mornings, their laughter carrying over the walls, two boys who had learned that family is not always blood, sometimes it is choice, sometimes it is the people who show up when everyone else has already left. At family dinners, Elena held Allara's hand across the table, her eyes glistening. "You brought my son back to me," she whispered once, when the children were outside. "Not the man he was, but the man he could be. Thank you." On a bridge spanning the Miami River, Allara and Nicholas stood wrapped in each other's arms, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. This was the bridge where she had stood 6 months before, where despair had whispered that it would be easier to let go, easier to step into the water and let the current take her. But she had not. She had chosen to fight. She had chosen Emma and Daniel. She had chosen survival. And that choice had led her here, to a man who was learning to paint again, to a life that was not lavish but real, to a family that had been broken and was now healing. "Do you remember what I told you the night the evidence went viral?" Nicholas asked, his lips against her hair. "That it was only the beginning," Allara said. "It was." He turned her to face him. "But I did not know it would begin like this. With you. With us." The sun broke fully over the horizon, flooding the world with light. Sometimes the people who have lost everything teach us what truly matters. Allara Reynolds had owned nothing but $34 and a pair of worn orthopedic shoes. She had 2 children, a job that barely sustained them, and the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders like a coffin lid. But she had possessed something that cannot be bought or sold or taken away, the strength to choose compassion over bitterness, action over despair, love over the vengeance that had nearly consumed her entire world. Nicholas Corsetti had owned an empire. He had built towers of money and power, had commanded loyalty through fear, had lived by a code that said weakness was death and sentiment was a luxury only the living could afford. But in the moment when a woman threw herself in front of a bullet meant for his mother, he learned the truth that no amount of violence could have taught him. True power is not about control. It is about surrender. Surrender to grace. Surrender to the possibility that we are not defined by our worst moments, but by our choice to become better than the darkness that made us. We are not defined by the fires that burn our lives to ash. We are defined by what we build from the ruins. If this story moved you, drop a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss another tale of redemption, betrayal, and second chances. Comment below and tell us, what did you think of Nicholas and Allara's journey? What would you have done in her place? Tomorrow, we have another story about a woman who discovers that the man destroying her life is the only one who can save it. You will not want to miss what happens next. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you good health, joy, and days filled with peace. Remember this, no matter how dark the night, dawn is always coming. Goodbye, and we will see you again very soon.